Hello, everyone. I'm your sleep sinners for tonight, here to guide you into a peaceful and mysterious slumber. I know many of you use these videos to help you fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, I'd love to know where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now. Go ahead, get comfortable, relax, and let the rain and stories take you away. The mirror of Malacca, Malaysia. They say every reflection holds a piece of your soul, but what if the mirror you're looking into already has one trapped inside? Lin Wei Jian had never considered himself superstitious. At 26, with a business degree from a prestigious university and a growing reputation among Penang's vintage collectors, he prided himself on his rational approach to life. Superstition was for his grandmother, who still burned offerings for ancestors and placed salt in the corners of rooms to ward off evil spirits. Not for him, but the mirror changed everything. It began on a muggy Wednesday afternoon in Georgetown, the kind of day where the air feels like a wet blanket and sweat beads on your skin the moment you step outside. Wei Jian's antique shop, Treasures of Time, was tucked away on Armenian Street, nestled between hipster cafes and street art that tourists flocked to photograph. His phone pinged with notification. A message from his supplier, Risal, found something special. Old Peranakan estate sale. Coming your way this afternoon. This one's different. Wei Jian rolled his eyes. Risal always claimed his finds were special. Usually, they were overpriced colonial era trinkets or fake jade carvings. The bell above the door jingled 3 hours later as Risal bustled in, clutching a package wrapped in faded red cloth. "This is it," Risal said, his eyes bright with excitement. "From a house in Malacca, over 100 years old, they say." "You always say that," Wei Jian responded with a smirk, but something about Risal's demeanor caught his attention. The normally talkative man seemed unsettled. Carefully, Risal unwrapped the package on the glass countertop. The mirror was smaller than Wei Jian had expected, perhaps the size of a tablet. Its frame was carved teak, intricate with symbols he didn't recognize, not typical Peranakan motifs, but something older. The glass itself had that foggy quality of antique mirrors, with scattered dark spots where the silvering had deteriorated. Yet, despite its age, the reflection remained remarkably clear. "Where did you actually get this?" Wei Jian asked, picking it up. It was heavier than it looked. Risal hesitated. "From the estate of an old woman, Rahana Tenku, died last month. No family claimed her things." "How much?" "For you? 2,000 ringgit." Wei Jian almost laughed. "You're joking. It's nice craftsmanship, but..." "The family who owned it before Rahana all died mysteriously. The grandmother claimed the mirror was from the time of the Sultanate, said it belonged to a princess who used dark magic. So you're charging me an extra 1,000 for a ghost story?" Wei Jian raised an eyebrow. Risal didn't smile back. "No, I'm charging you extra because I had to sleep with the lights on after having it in my house for just one night." Wei Jian studied his supplier's face. Risal wasn't one for dramatics. "What happened?" "I put it in my living room, went to bed, woke up at midnight to get water and passed by it." Risal's voice dropped. There was someone else's face in it. Not mine. A woman. She was screaming without sound. Wei Jian felt a chill despite the humid heat. Probably just a weird reflection. Light playing tricks. "Take it or leave it," Risal said, already backing toward the door. "But if you take it, don't look into it at midnight." Of course, that was exactly what Wei Jian planned to do. The first strange thing Wei Jian noticed was how customers reacted to the mirror he'd placed on display near the register, thinking its craftsmanship would catch buyers' eyes. Instead, people seemed to deliberately avoid looking at it. One elderly woman actually gasped and made the sign of the cross when she spotted it. Unusual in predominantly Muslim and Buddhist Malaysia. "Do you know what those symbols mean?" she asked Wei Jin in Malay, pointing a trembling finger at the carvings. "Decorative patterns," Wei Jian replied confidently. "Paranoid influence." The woman shook her head. "No, those are binding symbols. Old magic, to keep something in." She left without buying anything, muttering prayers under her breath. By closing time, Wei Jian had convinced himself the mirror was simply suffering from bad feng shui placement. He'd move it tomorrow, maybe to the back wall. His apartment was a 20-minute walk from the shop in one of the renovated heritage buildings. That night, he settled into his evening routine. Takeout from the hawker center down the street, scrolling through social media, messaging friends about weekend plans. At 11:55 p.m., he remembered Risal's warning. Don't look into it at midnight. The mirror sat on his coffee table, where he'd placed it earlier, wrapped back in its red cloth. Wei Jian stared at it, feeling foolish for even considering the possibility of supernatural activity. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, pulling out his phone to record. If anything unusual happened, he'd have proof, and when nothing happened, he could tease Risal mercilessly. He unwrapped the mirror and positioned it upright against a stack of books. His reflection looked back at him. Tired eyes, slightly disheveled hair, the blue light of his TV casting strange shadows. 11:59 p.m. Wei Jian found himself holding his breath. The second hand on his wall clock swept past 12. Nothing changed. His own reflection stared back at him, now looking slightly embarrassed. "Well, that was anticlimactic," he said aloud, reaching for the mirror to rewrap it. That's when he noticed something odd about his reflection. When he moved his hand, the reflection delayed, just by a millisecond, barely perceptible. He waved. The reflection waved back, but just a beat too late. "What the..." He moved again. The reflection followed with that same slight delay, and then it smiled. A smile Wei Jian was certain he wasn't making. In one horrifying moment, his reflection's face began to shift. The features melted and reformed, still human, but no longer his. A young woman's face took shape in the glass, her eyes wide with what looked like relief. Her lips moved, soundlessly forming words he couldn't understand. Wei Jian dropped the mirror. It clattered onto the coffee table, but didn't break. When he finally worked up the courage to look again, minutes later, his own terrified face stared back at him. The video on his phone showed nothing unusual, just him staring into the mirror, then suddenly jerking back as if startled. No transformation, no strange woman. Yet Wei Jian knew what he'd seen, and he couldn't shake the feeling that for those brief moments, someone else had been looking out through the glass, trying desperately to communicate. He wrapped the mirror back in its cloth and shoved it into his closet before finally falling into a restless sleep. His dreams were filled with a woman's voice, whispering in a language he almost understood. The next morning, rationality returned with the daylight. Wei Jian attributed the experience to exhaustion, an overactive imagination fueled by Risal's stories, and maybe the extra spicy char kwai teow he'd had for dinner. Still, he called his grandmother. Amma lived in a small apartment in Air Item, surrounded by potted plants and protective charms. At 87, she remained the family's connection to traditions the younger generations had largely abandoned. If anyone would know about potentially haunted mirrors, it would be her. "Ah, Ma, do you know any old stories about mirrors? Ones that might trap spirits?" Wei Jian asked after the usual pleasantries. The line went silent for so long that Wei Jian checked to see if the call had dropped. "Why are you asking about such things?" Her voice had turned sharp. "Just curious. I got an interesting mirror for the shop." "Describe it." Wei Jian did in detail, The carved frame, the symbols, the age of the glass. Where is it from? Malacca, an old house. The woman who owned was named Rahana Tenku. Another long silence. Bring it here. Today. Ah, Ma, it's fine. I was just... Jen. She rarely uses name without the way. If what you have is what I think it is, it's not safe. Bring it here before sundown. The urgency in her voice unsettled him more than the experience with the mirror had. After hanging up, Wei Jian retrieved the mirror from closet. In the morning light, it looked ordinary. Beautiful craftsmanship, yes, but just an antique. He decided to research the symbols before visiting his grandmother. At the shop, he photographed the carvings and ran them through image search. Nothing definitive came back. Next, he searched for Rahana Tenku Malacca and found a sparse obituary from last month. She had died at 92, with no surviving family, a former teacher at a girls' school. Further digging revealed an archived newspaper article from 1978. A house fire had killed a family of 4 Malacca, all except for one survivor, Rahana Tenku, then 45 years old. The article mentioned she'd been out of the house when the fire started, returned to find her husband and 3 children dead. Wei Jian's phone rang, startling him. An unfamiliar number. Hello, is this the owner of Treasures of Time? A woman's voice, elderly but firm. Yes, this is Wei Jian. How can I help you? My name is Amina. I was a friend of Rahana Tenku. A pause. I understand you have acquired her mirror. Wei Jian's heart raced. He hadn't told anyone about the mirror except his grandmother. How did you? Rahana made me promise to track it if anything happened to her. It must be destroyed. Destroyed? It's an antique. It's dangerous. Amina's voice hardened. That mirror has been in Rahana's possession since 1958. She was its keeper. She contained what's inside it. And what exactly is inside it? Wei Jian asked, trying to keep his voice steady. A princess from the Malacca Sultanate, Puteri Hang Li Po. She practiced forbidden magic and was punished by being trapped in the mirror for eternity. But the containment is weakening. Rahana was the last trained in the old ways to keep the binding strong, without the proper rituals. Wei Jian almost laughed. Almost. But the memory of that face in the mirror stopped him. I'll give you 2 options, Amina continued. Bring the mirror to me so I can properly dispose of it, or learn how to become its keeper yourself. But decide quickly. The bindings weaken with each midnight that passes. This is ridiculous, Wei Jian said, but without conviction. Look into it at midnight again, Amina replied calmly. See if she speaks to you. If she does, it means she's chosen you as the next keeper. If not, her voice trailed off. Well, let's hope it's not too late. After Amina hung up, Wei Jian sat in stunned silence. Part of him wanted to dismiss the whole thing as elaborate nonsense, yet the growing weight of coincidences was becoming difficult to ignore. He called his grandmother back. Ah, Ma, did you know a woman named Rahana Tenku? The sharp intake of breath was answer enough. How do you know that name? She demanded. She owned the mirror before. Her friend just called me. Something about a trapped princess and keepers of binding magic. His grandmother actually shouted, You bring that mirror here now. Don't wait. But what? If Amina called you, things are worse than I feared. The princess is awake. Wei Jian didn't go to his grandmother's house. Not yet. Instead, he closed the shop early and headed to the Penang State Museum. If this mirror truly had historical significance, supernatural elements aside, there might be records. The museum's research library was quiet, with only a few scholars hunched over ancient texts. Wei Jian approached the librarian, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on her nose. "I'm looking for information about Princess Hang Li Pe," he said. "Specifically anything related to unusual punishments or mirrors." The librarian raised an eyebrow. Hang Li Pe was a Chinese princess sent to marry the Sultan of Malacca in the 15th century, a political alliance. There's nothing in historical records about punishment or mirrors. Are there any less official sources? Legends, maybe? She studied him for a moment. There are always stories, folk tales. She disappeared into the stacks and returned with a weathered book. This contains collected oral histories from the Peranakan community. Some mention Hang Li Pe, but as a cautionary tale rather than historical fact. Wei Jian thanked her and settled at a reading table. The book was in Malay with occasional Chinese characters. He flipped through until he found a section titled The Dark Princess. The account described not the historical Hang Li Pe, but a princess by that name several generations later, a descendant who had been schooled in Chinese mysticism and Malay dark magic. According to the legend, she had attempted to use forbidden rituals to gain immortality, sacrificing 7 virgins in the process. When discovered, the Sultan couldn't execute her due to her royal blood. Instead, court magicians bound her soul to a mirror where she would remain conscious but powerless for eternity. The final paragraph made Wei Jian's blood run cold. It is said that over time, the princess learned to reach out from her glass prison. At midnight, when the boundary between worlds is thinnest, she can show her true face. She seeks a willing soul to free her through exchange. She takes their place in the living world, while they become trapped in the mirror for eternity. A chill ran down Wei Jian's spine, despite the library's warmth. He photographed the pages with shaking hands and left quickly. Outside, the evening was settling over Georgetown. The call to prayer echoed from nearby mosques as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Wei Jian checked his watch, 7:15 p.m. His grandmother would be furious that he hadn't arrived yet. His phone rang. "Amina again. Have you decided?" she asked without preamble. "I found information about Hang Li Pe," Wei Jian said. "The folk tales say she's dangerous. All power is dangerous in the wrong hands." Amina replied cryptically. "But the princess has been contained for centuries because there have always been keepers." "And what exactly does a keeper do?" "Maintains the binding symbols, performs the rituals that keep her trapped, ensures the mirror never falls into ignorant hands." A pause. Rahana believed the princess deserved her punishment. "I'm not so certain. There are always 2 sides to history." "You think she's innocent?" "I think 5 centuries is a long punishment, even for the guilty. But that's not for me to decide. The mirror chooses its keeper. If it's chosen you, you'll know tonight. And if I refuse, then bring it to me before midnight, or the princess will find another way out." Wei Jian's phone buzzed with a text as he ended the call. His grandmother. "Where are you?" "It's getting late. If you have that mirror, do not face it at midnight." He texted back, "Coming soon. Need to understand what's happening first." Her reply was immediate. "There's no time. She's strongest at midnight." Wei Jian looked at his watch again. 7:30 p.m. He still had time to make a decision. He hailed a taxi and gave his own address. If he was going to face this, he wanted to do it on his terms, not rushed by panic. At his apartment, he unwrapped the mirror and studied it carefully. The carvings that edged the frame now seemed more meaningful. Not decorative patterns, but precise symbols, mathematical in their precision. He traced one with his finger and felt an odd vibration, as if the wood hummed with energy. His research had given him fragments of understanding, but not enough. If the legends were true, he was holding something deadly dangerous. But if they weren't, if this was all elaborate superstition, then a valuable historical artifact would be destroyed for nothing. Wei Jian made his decision. He would look into the mirror at midnight again. If nothing happened, he'd consider the matter closed. If something did, well, he'd face that when it came. His phone buzzed repeatedly as both his grandmother and Amina tried to reach him. He silenced it. As midnight approached, Wei Jian positioned himself in front of the mirror, this time with candles lit around the room. Partly for atmosphere, partly because something told him the princess might respond better to traditional lighting than electric bulbs. 11:58 p.m. 11:59 p.m. Midnight. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Wei Jian's reflection stared back at him, flickering in the candlelight. Then, like water rippling, his image began to transform. The face that emerged in the mirror wasn't the same as the night before. This woman was regal, with high cheekbones and piercing eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge. Her hair was arranged elaborately, adorned with gold ornaments that marked her royal status. She wore what appeared to be traditional Peranakan nobility attire, but with Chinese influences that spoke to her heritage. Puteri Hang Li Pe. Unlike the previous night, when the transformation had been jarring and brief, this manifestation remained stable. The princess studied Wei Jian with undisguised curiosity. Then impossibly she spoke, and he could hear her voice as if from a great distance. "You seek me willingly," she said in archaic Malay that Wei Jian could somehow understand. "Are you to be my new jailer or my liberator?" Wei Jian's mouth went dry. "I'm trying to understand what you are." "What I am." A bitter smile crossed her face. "I am justice perverted. I am punishment without trial. I am the victim of men's fears of a woman with power. The legends say you killed 7 innocent people." Her eyes flashed. "Men write the legends. Men who feared what I knew what I could do." She leaned closer within the mirror, her image becoming clearer. 5 centuries I have watched the world through this glass prison. I have seen empires fall and new nations rise. I have seen the world forget magic in favor of science. And still, I remain trapped. Why did the mirror come to me? Wei Jian asked. Because Rahana's bloodline ended with her death. The mirror seeks those with the potential to understand its magic. Her gaze intensified. You have that potential, Wei Jian. I've watched you since Risal brought me to your shop. You pretend to embrace the modern world entirely, but something in you remembers the old ways. It was unsettling to hear her use his name. What do you want from me? Freedom, she said simply. After 500 years, is that too much to ask? The texts say you can only be freed through exchange. Someone must take your place. Her expression didn't change. All magic requires balance. So, you want me to trap myself in there? To let you out? No, she said, surprising him. I want you to become my true keeper. Not like the others who merely maintain my prison. I want you to learn how to break the binding correctly. And why would I do that if the stories are true? The stories are lies. For a moment, her composed facade cracked. I was a healer and astronomer. I used my knowledge to help people. But when I predicted a solar eclipse accurately, something the court astrologers failed to do, they accused me of dark magic. When I created medicines that saved lives, they claimed I was consorting with jinn. Her voice softened. Look deeper into the histories. Wei Jian. Find my truth, not their lies. Then decide if I deserve eternity in this prison. The clock on Wei Jian's wall chimed the quarter hour. 12:15 a.m. Our time grows short, she said. The binding strengthens as midnight passes. Will you help me? Before Wei Jian could answer, his apartment door burst open. His grandmother stood in the doorway, breathing heavily, supported by a woman he didn't recognize but assumed must be Amina. Get away from the mirror, his grandmother shouted. The princess's face contorted with anger. The old keepers, she hissed, always interfering. Amina stepped forward, her elderly frame somehow imposing in the candlelight. Princess, you know the terms of your binding. You cannot solicit help directly. I speak only truth, the princess replied. Partial truth is the most dangerous kind, Amina countered, approaching cautiously. She carried a small pouch, from which she withdrew a handful of what looked like salt mixed with herbs. Wei Jian stood frozen between them, the mirror still in his hands. Grandson, his grandmother said softly, place the mirror down and step away. Something in her tone broke through his trance. Wei Jian carefully set the mirror on the coffee table and backed up. Amina began chanting in a language Wei Jian didn't recognize, sprinkling the herbal mixture in a circle around the mirror. The princess's image began to fade, her expression one of resigned disappointment rather than anger. Find my truth, she whispered before vanishing completely, leaving only Wei Jian's reflection in the glass. Amina finished her ritual, then turned to Wei Jian. You have much to learn if you've been chosen as the next keeper. I haven't agreed to anything, Wei Jian protested. His grandmother took his hand. The mirror came to you for a reason, Jian. Our family has a connection to the keepers going back generations. Why do you think I always insisted on the old ways? Wei Jian stared at her. You knew? All this time. I knew someday this might fall to you. I had hoped Rahana would find another successor. Amina wrapped the mirror carefully, this time in black cloth, inscribed with gold symbols. The princess is clever and patient. She has convinced many keepers over the centuries that she was wrong, that she deserves freedom. And wasn't she? Wei Jian asked. 500 years seems excessive for any crime. The two older women exchanged glances. That, his grandmother said, is why the mirror chose you. You question. You seek truth. She sighed. But some truths are dangerous. So what happens now? Wei Jian asked. Now. Amina said, you make a choice. Become the keeper and learn the full history, both the darkness and the light. Or walk away and we find someone else. If I walk away, will I ever know the truth about her? Amina smiled sadly. Some questions are better left unanswered. But Wei Jian had never been good at leaving questions unanswered. Part 6. 3 days later, Wei Jian found himself in Malacca, standing before a small wooden house set back from the road, surrounded by tropical vegetation that had grown wild with neglect. This had been Rahana Tenku's home, the place where the mirror had been kept for decades. After that midnight confrontation, Wei Jian had reluctantly agreed to let Amina take the mirror temporarily, while he considered her offer to become its keeper. His grandmother had returned to her apartment, extracting a promise from him to be careful. The princess has had centuries to perfect her persuasion, she warned. Now, accompanied by Amina, Wei Jian approached the house with caution. The door creaked open at her touch, revealing an interior caught in a time capsule. Rahana had lived modestly, but her home was filled with books, artifacts, and protective symbols similar to those on the mirror's frame. This was not just her home, Amina explained, but the sanctuary where she performed the binding rituals. Wei Jian noticed an altar-like table in what appeared to be the living room. Candle wax had dripped and hardened on its surface, and faded chalk marks formed complex geometric patterns. If I agreed to become the keeper, Wei Jian asked, what exactly would be required of me? Amina ran her fingers along a shelf of ancient texts. Monthly rituals at midnight to reinforce the binding, learning the sacred languages to understand the spells, protecting the mirror from those who might misuse it. She paused, and most importantly, resisting her influence. You make it sound like a lifetime commitment. It is. until you train your successor. Wei Jian wandered the house while Amina gathered some of Rahana's books. In what had been the bedroom, he found a journal on the nightstand. The last entry was dated just days before Rahana's death. The binding weakens as my strength fails. I have searched for a successor, but found none worthy. The princess grows stronger. Last night, she showed me visions of my family, claiming she could reunite us if I released her, after 67 years as keeper. Even I am not immune to her temptations. May whoever follows me have greater resolve. Wei Jian slipped the journal into his bag when Amina wasn't looking. They spent hours in that house, with Amina showing Wei Jian the basics of the binding rituals and explaining the history of keepers going back centuries. According to her, the first keeper had been one of the court magicians who created the mirror prison. Overcome with remorse after realizing the princess might have been innocent. So even from the beginning, there was doubt about her guilt, Wei Jian noted. Amina nodded reluctantly. There have always been inconsistencies in the historical record, but the consequences of error are too great. If she was guilty and we release her, and if she's innocent and we keep her in prison? Amina had no answer for that. As evening approached, they prepared to leave. Wei Jian had convinced Amina to let him take the mirror back. A keeper must begin their duties, after all. Though he hadn't fully committed, he was leaning toward acceptance. Something about this mystery called to him. The drive back to Penang was quiet. The mirror safely boxed and placed in the trunk of Wei Jian's car. Occasionally, he would glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the princess's face reflected instead of his own. It was nearly 11 p.m. when he arrived home. Amina had given him strict instructions not to unwrap the mirror until he completed the protective circle she'd taught him to create. But as midnight approached, Wei Jian found himself drawn to the box. "Find my truth," the princess had said. He opened Rahana's journal again and began reading entries from decades past. They documented her struggles, her doubts, and occasionally conversations with the princess during the midnight hour. One entry from 1982 stood out. "She showed me the execution today, how they bound her to the mirror. She was given no trial, no chance to defend herself. Just the accusations of jealous men and frightened peasants. The court magician, Hang Nadim, wept as he performed the binding. She doesn't know this, but he became the first keeper out of guilt. I began to understand his remorse." Wei Jian checked the time, 11:55 p.m., making a decision that he knew might change his life forever. He carefully unwrapped the mirror and placed it before him. Instead of Amina's protective circle, he arranged 7 candles around it, one for each of the victims the princess had allegedly sacrificed. As the clock struck midnight, the transformation began again. The princess appeared, but seemed surprised to find herself facing Wei Jian so soon. "You have questions," she said. "Not a question, but a statement." "I want the full truth," Wei Jian replied. "Not just your version, not just the keeper's version. Everything." For the first time, the princess smiled, a genuine smile that softened her imperial features. 5 centuries, and you're the first to ask for that. "Will you show me?" "I can do better than that," she said, her image in the mirror growing brighter. "I can take you there." Before Wei Jian could react, the room around him seemed to dissolve. The candles flickered and expanded into a blinding light. He felt a sensation like falling forward, even though he hadn't moved. When his vision cleared, he stood in a palace chamber from centuries past. But he wasn't truly there. He could see, but not interact, like watching a film in perfect 3D. And before him, adorned in royal finery, stood a younger version of the princess, surrounded by court officials with expressions ranging from fear to hatred. "Watch," whispered the princess's voice, though her image in this vision didn't speak. Watch and judge for yourself. The vision unfolded like a play, revealing the final days of Puteri Hang Li Po's freedom. Wei Jian saw her working tirelessly in her chambers, mixing herbs and consulting astronomical charts. He witnessed her healing the sick when a fever swept through Malacca, using techniques that combined Chinese medicine with local remedies. But he also saw the growing resentment from the court astrologers and physicians, whose traditional methods proved less effective. He watched as they whispered to the Sultan about unnatural powers and consorting with dark spirits. The princess's accurate prediction of an eclipse, which she had calculated mathematically, became the final evidence of her supposed witchcraft. Most disturbing was the scene of her alleged crime. The 7 victims hadn't been sacrificed. They had died of the fever despite her efforts to save them. The court magicians, seeking a scapegoat, claimed she had purposely let them die to harvest their souls for immortality rituals. The final scene showed her binding ceremony. The court magician, Hang Nadim, performed a ritual with tears streaming down his face, whispering apologies as he worked. The mirror, the same one Wei Jian now possessed, was used as the vessel for her imprisonment. Her soul was torn from her body and bound to the glass, while her physical form collapsed lifeless. With a disorienting shift, Wei Jian found himself back in his apartment, gasping as if he'd been underwater. The 7 candles had burned halfway down, suggesting he'd been in the vision for hours, though it felt like minutes. The princess watched him from the mirror, her expression unreadable. "Now you know," she said quietly. Wei Jian struggled to process what he'd witnessed. "You were innocent by your modern standards, yes, by the standards of my time." She shrugged. "I was guilty of challenging tradition, of being a woman who possessed knowledge men thought should be theirs alone. The keepers, do they know this truth?" Some suspected. Most chose not to look too deeply. It was easier to believe I deserved my fate. Wei Jian ran his hands through his hair, mind racing. "If I help release you, what happens? After 500 years, your body is long gone. The magic that bound me can create a new physical form," she explained. "But yes, it requires an exchange. Energy must balance. So, someone does have to take your place." The princess hesitated. "Not exactly. The exchange doesn't have to be a soul for a soul. It could be energy freely given. A sacrifice of a different kind." "What kind of sacrifice?" "Life force. Years of existence. 100 years of life from a willing donor would be sufficient to create my new form without imprisonment." Wei Jian's eyes widened. "You're asking me to give up 100 years of my life? That's more than I'll ever live." "Not you alone," she corrected. "If 7 people each gave 14 years and 4 months, it would equal the required amount. 7 to balance the 7 I supposedly sacrifice." The symmetry was poetic, but Wei Jian felt a chill. And these people, they'd die 14 years earlier than they should have? They would live their natural span, minus the years given. A 60-year life might become 46. It is a heavy price, I know. Wei Jian stood up and paced the room. "Even if I believed you, even if I want to help, how would I find 7 people willing to sacrifice years of their lives for someone they've never met?" "You wouldn't have to look far," came a voice from the doorway. Wei Jian spun around to find Amina standing there, with his grandmother beside her. "How long have you been there?" he demanded. "Long enough," his grandmother replied. "We felt the old magic activating. The princess has shown you the truth, hasn't she?" Wei Jian nodded slowly. "You knew? Both of you." Amina stepped forward. "I have been a keeper for 50 years. Rahana was my cousin. We both suspected, but there was never enough evidence to risk releasing her. Until now. The keepers have kept more than just the binding," his grandmother added. "We've kept her story alive, waiting for the right person to find a solution. And you think I'm that person? Wei Jian asked incredulously. The mirror chose you, Amina said simply, and you chose to seek truth rather than accept what you were told. That makes you different from all the keepers who came before. Wei Jian looked back at the princess in the mirror. Even if what you showed me is true, finding 7 willing people. 2 stand before you already, his grandmother interrupted. Amina and I have discussed this possibility for years. We are old. 14 years means less to us than to someone your age. You can't be serious, Wei Jian protested. I have lived a full life, his grandmother said firmly. If my remaining years can right a centuries-old injustice, that gives them more meaning than I could have hoped for. Amina nodded in agreement, and Rahana would have volunteered as well, had she lived long enough to see this day. That's still only 3. That's still only 3, Wei Jian pointed out. We'd need 4 more. The princess spoke again from the mirror, her voice somehow stronger than before. There are others, former keepers who have suspected the truth. They're descendants who have carried the burden of this secret through generations. Amina nodded. I can reach them, with your permission. Wei Jian felt overwhelmed. The weight of 5 centuries of injustice suddenly rested on his shoulders. I need time to think. Time is something I have had in abundance, the princess said with a sad smile. I can wait a little longer for your decision. 3 weeks passed. Wei Jian took a leave of absence from his shop, citing a family emergency. In a way, it was true. His entire understanding of his family had been upended by the revelation of their connection to the keepers. He spent days researching in libraries and museums, verified what he could of the princess's story. Historical records from that period were sparse, but he found enough corroborating evidence to support the vision she had shown him. The princess had indeed been known as a healer and astronomer before her sudden disappearance from court records, explained away as a return to China. Amina had contacted other keeper families, and to Wei Jian's surprise, 5 had responded, along with his grandmother and Amina. That made 7 potential volunteers. 7 people willing to sacrifice years of their lives to free a woman imprisoned for centuries. They gathered on a Friday evening at Rahana's house in Malacca, which Amina had inherited. The mirror sat covered in black cloth at the center of the room. 14 candles burned in a circle around it. 7 white for the volunteers, 7 red for the alleged victims of the princess. Wei Jian looked at the assembled group. His grandmother, Amina, and 5 strangers who share an extraordinary secret. The youngest was a woman in her 40s named Maya, a professor of history at the University of Malaya. The oldest was a man who introduced himself only as Uncle Chun, at least 90, but carried himself with remarkable vigor. Before we begin, Wei Jian said, addressing the group, I want to be certain everyone understands what they're agreeing to. According to the princess, each of you will give up 14 years and 4 months of your natural lifespan. You won't die immediately. You'll live out your days, but those days will be fewer than they would have been. Maya spoke up. My family has been burdened with this secret for 12 generations. My ancestor was one of the princess's students. He spent his life trying to prove her innocence, but died before he could succeed. This is my chance to complete his work. Uncle Chin nodded. When you reach my age, you realize how precious life is. But you also understand that how you spend your years matters more than how many you have. I choose to spend mine on justice. Each volunteer shared similar sentiments. They had all grown up with the story of the unjustly imprisoned princess, passed down through their families alongside the keeper responsibilities. Wei Jian had spent weeks verifying the ritual required for the princess's release. It would take place at midnight, the hour when the boundary between her world and theirs was thinnest. According to the ancient texts Amina had provided, all 7 volunteers would need to freely offer their years while touching the mirror simultaneously. And you're certain this will work? Wei Jian asked Amina for perhaps the 20th time. As certain as one could be about 500-year-old magic, she replied with a wry smile. The ritual has never been attempted before, but the principles are sound. As midnight approached, the volunteers arranged themselves around the mirror. Wei Jian remained outside the circle. He was to serve as a conductor of the ritual, but not a participant in the sacrifice. At 11:59, he uncovered the mirror. The princess appeared immediately, her image clearer and more vibrant than Wei Jian had ever seen it. She looked at each volunteer with gratitude evident in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "Your sacrifice will not be forgotten." Wei Jian began reciting the words Amina had taught him, an ancient invocation in a mixture of Malay, Chinese, and a language older than both. The candles flickered as if stirred by an unfelt breeze. "Place your hands on the frame," he instructed the volunteers when the clock struck midnight. As they complied, Wei Jian completed the invocation. A strange luminescence began to emanate from the mirror, growing brighter until he had to shield his eyes. The room filled with sound like glass, singing when a wet finger circles its rim. Pure and haunting. The volunteers gasped in unison, and Wei Jian felt a surge of energy flowing through the room. Then, just as suddenly, the light collapsed inward, converging on the mirror before bursting outward in a silent explosion. Where the mirror had been, a woman now stood, solid and real, dressed in the same royal attire Wei Jian had seen in his vision. Pewtery Hang Li Pe in the flesh, looking exactly as she had 5 centuries ago. The volunteers slumped back, looking exhausted but unharmed. Wei Jian's grandmother smiled weakly at him from where she sat on the floor. "It worked," she whispered. The princess took an unsteady step, as if relearning how to walk. She reached out to steady herself on Wei Jian's arm, her touch warm and undeniably real. 500 years, she murmured, looking around the room in wonder. 500 years of darkness and silence, and now life. Wei Jian stared at her, still struggling to believe what had happened. "Are you fully restored?" She nodded. "Thanks to all of you." She turned to address the volunteers. "I vow that your sacrifice will not be wasted. The years you have given me will be devoted to healing and knowledge, the purposes for which I was condemned." Amina approached her and bowed deeply. "Princess, the world has changed beyond recognition since your time. You will need guides. And protection," added Maya. "If word of your return spreads, there will be those who seek to exploit your knowledge." The princess smiled. "Then I am fortunate to have found such loyal allies." She looked at Wei Jian. "Especially you, who had the courage to question tradition and seek truth when it would have been easier to follow the path laid by others." Wei Jian felt a strange mixture of pride and uncertainty. "What happens now?" "Now," the princess said, "I begin again, as do all of you." She looked at the object around the room, the electric lights, the modern furniture, all the trappings of a world she had only observed through glass for centuries. "I have much to learn about this new world, and perhaps some wisdom from the old world to share in return." The mirror, which had fallen to the floor during the transformation, now appeared as ordinary glass. No magic, no prison, just a beautiful antique. Wei Jian picked it up carefully. "And this? Just a mirror now," the princess confirmed. "The binding is broken." Uncle Chin struggled to his feet, assisted by Maya. "I feel lighter somehow," he said, "as if a burden has been lifted, even as years have been taken." The other volunteers nodded in agreement. There was no visible change in their appearance, but something about them seemed altered, a piece that hadn't been there before. Wei Jian's grandmother approached him and took his hand. "You did well, Jian. You have ended a cycle that began long before any of us." As dawn approached, they made plans. The princess would stay with Amina temporarily, learning about the modern world while keeping her true identity secret. The volunteers would return to their lives, carrying the knowledge of what they had done but sworn to secrecy. Wei Jian realized that his life, too, had irreversibly changed. He had glimpsed a world beyond a rational one he had always embraced, a world where magic and justice intertwined across centuries. He could never go back to being just an antique dealer after this. As the others prepared to leave, the princess took Wei Jian aside. "Your shop? Treasures of time, is it not?" she asked. Wei Jian nodded, surprised she remembered such a detail from her time behind glass. "A fitting name," she said, "for you have indeed rescued the most precious treasure time had buried." She placed a hand on his cheek, a gesture both regal and intimate. "Not all prisons are made of glass, Wei Jian. Some are built of beliefs we never think to question. Remember that." Epilogue. 1 year later, Wei Jian's antique shop had been transformed. Now called the Princess's Mirror, it specialized in items with forgotten histories, objects whose true stories have been obscured by time and misunderstanding. And he had a business partner, a mysterious woman who called herself Li Ming. Few customers realized they were in the presence of royalty from the Malacca Sultanate. Those who commented on her occasionally archaic turns of phrase or her uncanny knowledge of historical artifacts were told she had studied ancient cultures extensively. The original mirror hung behind the counter, now just a beautiful antique with an extraordinary story that would never be told to casual browsers. The 7 volunteers visited occasionally. Wei Jian's grandmother claimed she felt more energetic than she had in years, despite technically having fewer years ahead of her. "Quality over quantity," she would say with a wink. On quiet evenings, when the shop was closed, the princess, now comfortable in jeans and t-shirts but never quite adapted to smartphones, would share stories of her time and teach Wei Jian ancient healing techniques that modern medicine had forgotten. In return, he introduced her to the wonders and absurdities of contemporary life. They never discussed the fact that she would outlive everyone who had helped free her, that she would still be young when Wei Jian grew old. Some consequences were best left for future contemplation. One night, as they closed the shop, a young woman entered just before Wei Jian could lock the door. She carried a small wooden box that looked centuries old. "I'm sorry we're closing," Wei Jian began. "I'm not here to buy," the woman said. "I'm here because I found something that belongs to the princess." Wei Jian froze. The woman smiled at his reaction. "My family has kept this for generations," she continued, opening the box to reveal an ancient golden hairpin inlaid with jade, exactly matching the one Wei Jian had seen the princess wearing in his vision. "We were told to wait for signs that she had returned, that her prison would become just a mirror again." The princess emerged from the back room, her eyes fixed on the hairpin. "Hang Nadim's family," she whispered. "You are descended from the magician who imprisoned me." The woman nodded. "And who spent the rest of his life trying to undo what he had done. This was your favorite ornament. He rescued it when the court ordered all your possessions destroyed." As the princess took the hairpin with trembling hands, the woman bowed deeply. "There are more of us, more who know the truth and have waited for your return. We have preserved what we could of your knowledge, your astronomical calculations, your healing techniques, your writings that the court tried to erase." Wei Jian watched as tears filled the princess's eyes, the first he had ever seen her shed. 5 centuries, she murmured, and still, truth finds its way to the surface. She placed the hairpin in her hair, a piece of her past reclaimed. In the mirror behind the counter, her reflection showed not just a woman, but a bridge between worlds, a living testament to persistence and justice that transcended time. Wei Jian thought of all the other objects in his shop, the chairs and tables, the vases and jewelry, the paintings and sculptures. Each had a story. Most would never be fully known. But some stories refused to remain buried, emerging when the right person came along to hear them. The woman who had brought the hairpin looked at Wei Jian. "You're the one who freed her," she said. The keeper who finally listened. "I just looked in a mirror," Wei Jian replied, "and saw something other than my own reflection." Outside, Georgetown continued its evening rhythm. Tourists wander in the heritage zone, locals heading home from work, street vendors calling out their wares. None of them aware that walking among them was a princess out of time, freed from centuries of imprisonment by 7 acts of sacrifice and 1 act of belief. Some treasures, Wei Jian had learned, were never meant to be kept. Sometimes the most valuable thing you could do with something precious was to let it go. And sometimes the most important reflections weren't the ones you saw in mirrors, but the truths you discover when you look beyond them. The end.